The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Educational Considerations for Your Child IEP 504 Information for Every Transplant Family webinar. My name is Cindy Andrake, and I am the Manager of Family Support at the Children's Cardiomyopathy Foundation. We're thrilled to be partnering with transplant families in support of National Pediatric Transplant Week. Before we start, I have a couple of housekeeping items I'd like to review. In order to provide the highest quality webinar session and to avoid any background noise, all attendees will be in the listen-only mode during the presentation. If at any time you experience technical issues, please type your concerns into the chat window on your control panel and we'll do our best to address them. If you have any audio issues or difficulty hearing, you should be able to switch from your computer screen to a call-in phone number to correct the audio. If the control panel is preventing you from seeing the screen, you can always hide it by clicking the small orange arrow at the top left of the control panel. We are recording today's webinar presentation and will post it on CCF's YouTube channel, CCF Heart Kids. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Melissa McQueen, who is the founder and executive director of Transplant Families. Melissa will introduce us to our speaker today. Thanks for your partnership, Melissa, and welcome.
Hi, Cindy, and thanks so much. We always look forward to co-presenting these very informative webinars with Children's Cardiomyopathy Foundation during National Pediatric Transplant Week. Transplant Families was formed and very much inspired by CCF in hopes to support, educate, and inspire. We do this for all solid organ and bone marrow transplant families. We provide the same support we would hope to receive as transplant families ourselves. We continue to be proud to work with you and all the supporting organizations, transplant societies, children's hospitals, medical professionals, and many others that make pediatric transplant a much easier journey. Every day after our child's transplant is truly a gift to us, and we thank you for that. We are so happy to celebrate National Pediatric Transplant Week and encourage you to share your story with the hashtag Kids Transplant Week. Now, it is my privilege to introduce my good friend Stacy. She is a developmental therapist with early intervention and currently works as an independent contractor at Right Start Pediatric Therapies. She studied early childhood special education at Roosevelt University and holds a master's degree in teacher leadership from Elmhurst College. She also has certification in infant toddler brain architecture from 0 to 3. Stacy has worked as an early childhood special education teacher and does advocacy for families at IEP meetings on an as-needed basis. She is a member of Illinois Developmental Therapist Association, the Council for Exceptional Children, the Division for Early Childhood, the Illinois Early Learning Project 0 to 3, and the Ounce of Prevention Fund. Most importantly, Stacy is mom to heart transplant recipient Ben and his 2 sisters. Welcome, Stacy, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to present IEP and 504 planning for your transplant child to help you better advocate for your child. I know this is about IEP and 504 planning, but I thought first we would start off with early intervention services. I know that sometimes our children are transplanted as infants, so I thought we'd begin with early intervention. So what is early intervention? Early intervention is available for children from birth to 3 that have any qualifying medical diagnosis or developmental delay of 30% or more as evaluated during a team evaluation. So on a team evaluation, there will always be a developmental therapist. The team that comes out to evaluate your child will depend on what concerns you have for your child. So if you have speech concerns, there will be a speech therapist on the team. If you have concerns with gross motor skills, there will be a physical therapist. It just depends on what kind of concerns you would have for your child. You may be receiving these services in the hospital if your child is pre or post-transplant, such as OT, PT, speech concerns. You can apply while your child is pre or post-transplant for early intervention. You can apply for these services while your child is in the hospital or after you have left the hospital. So if you suspect your child has a delay, you can call your local EI office. The evaluation and the team meetings are always free, so it never hurts to have your child assessed. During the assessment, the team will look at scores to determine if your child has a delay of greater than 30% or a qualifying medical diagnosis. Sometimes during the, right after the evaluation, the team will meet and decide to have the team meeting to go over the scores. Sometimes the team meeting will be a week later. It just depends kind of on what your CFC does. During that meeting, you will have your individual family service plan made if your child qualifies for early intervention services. If your child does not qualify for services, you can always contest this and say that you want another evaluation at another time. If your child does qualify for services, then then you will get started with early intervention, and early intervention will be done in your child's natural environment. This means that your child's natural environment means in the home, the daycare, or if you prefer, this can be at the library, shopping, any other places that your child would naturally be. So as a developmental therapist, I have done early intervention at shopping malls. I've done it in grocery stores. I've had parents tell me, my child just has tantrums every single time that we go to the grocery store. He won't stay in the shopping cart. He won't stay holding my hands. And so we've done early intervention in a shopping store. We've done in the shopping mall so that the parents have those great resources on how to help their child, how to help them feel comfortable going into places that they have to be able to do on a normal day-to-day basis. Many people think that their child will grow out of any delays that they have, and this can be true. They can eventually start walking, they can eventually start talking. It can happen that a child with a speech delay will start walking at 2 years old, or start talking at 2 years old, or with a gross motor delay, they'll start walking at 2 years old. But since early intervention evaluations are free, it never hurts to have them evaluated and have those resources in place for you to help your child along and to help them just get a little boost, get a little extra supports for you. And certain types of transplants can lead to certain delays. For instance, if your child has a heart transplant, they have chest precautions for 6 to 8 weeks. And so during that time, they aren't using those upper body muscles. So if it's during infancy, toddlerhood, they aren't pushing up, they aren't using their core muscles, and they aren't able to start that crawling motion right away. And so this might lead to some gross motor delays. Or if they're on a ventilator, they might have some feeding delays. They might have some speech delays because they're not using their voice. They're not using those babbling sounds, those ma, 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 da, da sounds. So this is where it would be great to have speech therapy and physical therapy and for those gross motor delays and speech delays to come into your home and other places. Now at this time, we are in a very unique situation because due to COVID, face-to-face EI services have been suspended. This does not mean that your therapies have been suspended. Many therapists are still making phone calls to help their parents along, to help them with those IFSP goals, and many therapists are doing teletherapy in different states. Teletherapy does depend state to state. Certain states might not be doing teletherapy right now, so it really does depend on your state. But these are certain ways that therapists are making sure that the children are getting access to the therapies that they need. It really is dependent on the family's needs. Some families do feel that teletherapy will not help. They don't want to be chasing their child around with a phone, and so they might want phone calls instead. Some parents feel teletherapy is much better because they want to be able to imitate what their therapist is doing. So they want to see the therapist in action. They want to see what they're doing, and it's more like that face-to-face therapy. So it really is families' individual writes what they want to do, which type of therapy they want to do, if they want phone calls, if they want teletherapy, or if they just want to suspend therapy until we can get back to our face-to-face interactions too. Some families have gone with that as well. So after early intervention, this is where we start moving into IEPs and 504s. So moving on to early childhood, ages 3 to 6, and this can encompass also all of early elementary school. If your child was an EI, they will automatically be referred for an evaluation for an IEP to their local school district for special education preschool. And this is where the IEP and 504 plan will start happening. If your child was not an EI, you can self-refer to your local school district through what is known as the Child Find Act. So when a child moves on, they are referred for the IEP at the local school district, but this doesn't mean that they will automatically receive an IEP. Sometimes children in EI make such great gains and such great progress that they don't necessarily need a special education classroom. Sometimes they have made great gains in almost all areas that they might need just what is referred to as itinerant services. So this is where they might be going to the public school for just speech services 1 or 2 times a week, or just OT services 1 or 2 times a week. They might not need the full special education experience. But if they are referred for the IEP and they do have an IEP, you will be involved in that whole process, and you will be involved in making the goals and telling what your concerns are for your child. If you are not in EI and you're self-referring for the IEP, then this is going to look a little different. You're going to be going through your local school district, and you're going to want to call and ask who the person is that you're going to have to write to. It's different in different school districts. It could be called the special education liaison, the special education coordinator. So you want to see who that person is that you're going to call to talk to, and you're going to want to write down that you want a special education evaluation and send it to that person. So what is an IEP? What is it that you want in an IEP? An IEP is different than a 504 plan in that an IEP will set educational goals as well as can have your child's health plan in it. An IEP is an individualized educational plan, and the federal law that covers it is known as IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Act. And to receive an IEP, a child must have one of the 13 disabilities listed under IDEA law, as well as the disability must affect the child's educational performance and or ability to learn and benefit from the educational curriculum. So when you put in writing that you want your child evaluated, this starts the clock for the school district to evaluate your child. The school district has 14 school days to say yes or no to whether or not they will evaluate. If they say no, they will explain the reasoning and your rights, and you do have rights under IDEA law, so you can contest this. You can say that you want an independent educational evaluation. You can say you want to go to mediation. You have many rights when the school says no. If they say yes, they will explain what comes next, which is that they have 60 school days to evaluate and write the reports on their evaluations. And then after that, they will have the eligibility meeting. At the eligibility meeting, 3 days before the eligibility meeting, you should receive all of the written reports. Any written reports that are done, you will have 3 days prior to the meeting. And at the eligibility meeting doesn't necessarily mean that your child is found eligible, but that's where you will go learn what was in the report and if your child is found eligible for the IEP. And if they're found eligible for the IEP, then you will sign consents for the IEP to be put in place. If you do not feel something in the IEP is appropriate or you want something added, this is the time to do it. the IEP cannot be implemented until you sign it. So it's very important to add or take out anything at this meeting before you sign the IEP, because that is what starts it. That's when it gets started. So as I said, the IEP sets measurable learning goals for child's educational experience, and it's created by a team including you, the parent. The goals include present levels of performance and functional performance, as well as annual goals and how they'll be met, what team members will help the child meet the goals, and strategies for meeting the goals. The parents will always receive written notice when the school wants to change anything in the IEP. They cannot just go changing something in the IEP if they feel that something needs to be added to the IEP, or if they feel like your child has met his goals. They can't just take the goals out of the IEP. They have to always notify you in writing if they want to change anything in the IEP. You also have stay put rights in the IEP. So if you have an IEP already and you are disagreeing about something that is in it, you can exercise your stay put rights, which means that you keep your current IEP until you come to an agreement about what should go into the IEP. So your IEP will stay in place until you come to an agreement about what will go into the next IEP. And whereas the school does not receive funding for children who have 504 plans, they do receive funding for students that have IEPs. And some IEP goals that you might see for your child are things like child will navigate stairs safely with and without supports. Child will transfer from a wheelchair with supports to a seated belt chair. Child will grasp objects with both hands. Child will cross the midline to grab objects. And you can also include health goals, such as child will put on sunblock with assistance every time they go outside. Child will use an alarmed watch to remind them of medication time, and with supports go to the nurse to obtain medication. So there's just a few IEP goals. Now, IEPs during the time of COVID, this, as I said before, is a very different time, but even so, you still have rights under your child's IEP. Some states are lifting shelter-in-place orders. Currently in Illinois, we are not going back to school this year. If your state is lifting a shelter-in-place order, or if your state has decided that they haven't decided if you are going back to school or not, and you want to keep your child out longer, you can talk to your individual transplant center about their advice for your child and whether they feel it is safe for your child to return to school or not. You can put it into your IEP that during times of pandemics, that your child is not to be in school and will receive e-learning. One thing to note is that you can also have your team write a letter if your child has siblings, that the siblings are not to be put into school during a time of pandemic and that they should receive e-learning as well. We had to do this with our son, actually, before we found out that we would not be going into school. During my daughter's 504 plan, I had it put in there that she would not be returning to school and would continue receiving e-learning, and her team was fine with that. They said that they would work with us. They would get her e-learning plans even if the shelter in place was lifted. But like I said, we're not going back to school this year, so it's not an issue. One thing is you would definitely want to have your child's team write a letter about why their siblings should not return to school. And this might be a little trickier if your child and their sibling is in a different school. Say your child is in the elementary and the sibling is in middle school. So you might want to have like the school nurse call the transplant team and have them talk to each other, but it definitely can be put in there. So what is Section 504 and how is this different than an IEP? So Section 504 differs from an IEP in that a child can receive a 504 plan if he has any disability. Section 504 covers a wide range of disabilities, and the disability must also affect the child's ability to learn in a general education classroom. Section 504 covers a broad definition of disabilities. It says that a disability must substantially limit a major life activity, and it must be made on the basis of individual inquiries. Major life activities include functions such as caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, learning, and working. And this list is not exhaustive. So you can see Section 504 differs from an IEP, and that a child can receive a 504 if he has any disability. So if your child doesn't qualify for an IEP, they definitely will qualify for a Section 504 plan, because the list is so exhaustive that they cover so many disabilities. The disability must also affect the child's ability to learn in a general education classroom. And they do sound very similar, but whereas a 504 removes barriers and provides supports and accommodations, an IEP is an individualized educational plan that has measurable learning goals and related services for the child's educational performances. So what does an IEP look like for a middle school child? So an IEP for a middle school child may look very similar to when they were in elementary school, but they may have some different accommodations as the workload gets harder and they have more to do. So you might see things like having an extra set of books, one at home and one for school, so as not to fatigue them. You might also have them do the same worksheets, but less of it. So odd numbers only, or just 20 problems if fatigue is a problem at night. Children in the middle school are also getting older and might be ready to take on more responsibility. So this is where you might be able to let them decide if they need to go to the nurse to lay down, whereas in elementary school, you might have decided for your child that they should only do 30 minutes of gym instead of an hour. Or you might let your middle school child decide when he or she has exhausted themselves, and this can be put in the IEP plan, that they're allowed to stop at the point that they are tired. Some educational accommodations may still look the same, such as testing in a different room or going to the nurse for meds and carrying a water bottle at all times. You can also start adding in some other health goals related to medication and advocacy. So things like child will learn the name of her medications and sort them into a pill box with feeding supports, and child will learn to advocate for themselves during gym class and ask to be dismissed to the nurse's office when not feeling able to participate. And children in middle school will eventually be going on to high school and will be taking on more responsibilities. So it's not unheard of to ask for certain goals, such as having a child learn to advocate for themselves so that they're able to do so in high school and beyond, when they start to have to go to the doctor by themselves and eventually need to make doctor appointments by themselves, which is after high school, but is better to learn this sooner rather than later. And a 504 plan for the middle school is also looking similar, but might change slightly. As your child gets older and is able to take on more responsibilities, you might be able to take some things out of the 504 plan, such as having their teacher apply sunscreen when they get outside, because honestly, middle schoolers are probably not going to want their teacher applying their sunscreen, but they may keep things in, such as frequent bathroom breaks, letting the child go to the nurse for fatigue, going to the nurse for meds, carrying water bottles at all times. You might also be adding new things, such as if your child received a diagnosis of ADHD. Some accommodations might be things like sitting near the teacher, frequent checks that homework is written down, checking to make sure they turn them in. And children miss a lot of school due to health when they're pre or post transplant. So you'll want to ensure, even as early childhood, that they are not penalized for any absences. And you want to ensure that the truant officer is not called because of absences. So this is an accommodation that can be put in an IEP or a 504 plan. And you'll want to assure that the nurse on staff, if you have a nurse on staff in your school, is familiarized with your child's condition so that no medications are ever given that could adversely affect your child, as well as so that there is someone with knowledge of your child in case of emergency. If there is no nurse on staff, because some schools do not have nurses on staff, you'll want to ensure that there is someone in the school that has knowledge of your child and that is the point person that you would go to in case of an emergency. Again, some accommodations are that you could also put in there would be like no contact sports after transplant, immediately after transplant, contacting the team about when or if contact sports can take place. Another one that can be seen is having an extra snack break. Sometimes in middle school, kids have lunch at around 10:30, and especially if their medication makes them nauseous right away, right after they take it, and they have lunch at 10:30, they might be really hungry if they're in school until 3:30. So adding in an extra snack break could be crucial. So for high school and beyond, an IEP for a high school student will look similar to middle school, but the goals will probably change depending on the progress your child has made and any new health concerns. Your school nurse will also want to help your child start advocating more for themselves in preparation for college. So they may add in some goals to promote health self-advocacy, and the 504 also will look similar to a middle school 504. Many times a middle school 504 is rolled over onto high school and the items are added on to help the child advocate more for themselves. You might see some more items like the child will walk himself to the school nurse to ask for medication instead of having to have this facilitated for him. This doesn't mean the supports are gone, but the emphasis is on the child advocating and being self-sufficient to prepare for adulthood. And your child's guidance counselor will be a big support in this, helping to guide them more and more to self-sufficiency. When your child hits a certain age, and it's different for all centers, their transplant clinics might start having them take over more of their care. They may encourage them to know more of their medicines they take, what time they take them, what the medicine is for, what dose they take, and they may encourage your child to make more of their own appointments. So you can talk to your transplant APN or social worker about having these items put in your child's IEP or 504 plan so that they're working on them in school to get more practice on it. And especially if your child is shy or socially anxious, they may have trouble making phone calls or calling to get their medications. So you can have an IEP goal that they practice with the nurse to practice appointment calls, practice pharmacy calls. You can have a goal of practicing with the nurse the names of medications, doses, timing that they take them. You can have them practice with the nurse putting them in a pill box and sorting them out for the week. All of these are practical life goals and accommodations that can be put in an IEP or 504 plan. And as these relate to other health impairment in an IEP and are considered more educational in nature, you're more likely to see these in an IEP, but it doesn't hurt to ask if it can be included in a 504 plan as well. As your child gets closer to transitioning out of high school and into college, you will want to see them taking over more and more of their care to prepare them for being able to be completely self-sufficient when it comes to their appointments. Of course, they can always come to you when they need any help, but they should be starting to do the majority of their health-related items on their own by the time they've graduated high school. And one note, in college, there are no IEPs, but your child still has protection under Section 504, as this is a civil rights law. Your child will have to go to their college's Accessibility and Disability Services office, which could be called different things depending on the state and or college. They will need to record their records of their health needs, and they will need to explain to the college what accommodations and modifications they need in order to be successful in college. And here are just some suggested modifications and accommodations that we might see in an IEP or a 504 plan, and these will all be included in the slides that will be handed out, so don't feel like you have to write them down right away. And these are just some links to what we might see as some restrictions and other resources that we might have, all generously provided to us by the Children's Cardiomyopathy Foundation. And these are just a few links to pediatric resources by transplant type. And I am willing to take any questions that you might have.
Great, thank you so much, Stacy. I just want to remind people we do have a couple of questions, but if you do have questions from anybody in the audience, you can just write them in the question box, which is on the control panel. A couple of people already submitted some questions. So what are your suggestions if you find that a school district has not been helpful in meeting the suggested guidelines or accommodations?
For an IEP or for a 504? Just the person.
It doesn't say, but I guess maybe for both cover.
Okay, so I would say your first step would be to call a team meeting with the school district and try to come to an agreement on what you both are comfortable with. If you still can't come to an agreement, I would suggest, if you're able to get an advocate. An advocate is going to be somebody that is going to be able to help you and your child. They have no connection to the school. They're not like working on the school's behalf, so they're working for you and your child. If that's not helpful, or if that's not available to you, if you cannot find an advocate, you can always go to your school district and request mediation. And then a mediator is somebody that is impartial. They are going to help you and the school district come to an agreement about what is best for your child, what needs to happen so that your child can get the best education.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question is, what school modification suggestions or suggestions do you have for my child who often feels socially isolated because they can't engage in certain recommendations? Do you have any suggestions for that?
I would wonder what recommendations they can't engage in. I don't. I kind of would need some follow-up on what recommendations they can't engage in order to help with resources for the person. I need a little more information.
Okay, I'll see if we get anything more, and if not, then we'll just move on.
Okay, yeah, tell the person, you can give the person my email and she can email me and I can try to help.
Great, okay, thank you. Okay, I do have let me see. Each state has a family organization that does support around special education. They are called PTIs. I think that's just more of a comment than a question. Do you have any comment on that, Stacy?
That is, yes, they do. The parent teacher information hub, yes, they do.
Okay.
Okay. I would agree.
Okay, great. Okay, so what recommendations would you suggest for the school plan if my child is immunocompromised?
I would definitely suggest that they advocate for your child being in a classroom with the majority of the children vaccinated, making sure that you are called if anyone is sick in the classroom right away as soon as possible, making sure that they are promoting vigorous hand washing and sanitizing of surfaces. It depends on the age of the child, but you could have, if it's an older child, like 7 or 8 or older, you could have the child washing down his seat and table before eating and before any other kind of activities. I would definitely say, I know public schools are big on bring in all your supplies and it's going to be a communal supply. I would say no for a transplant child. They have their own supplies so that it's not a communal supply. We don't need our transplant kids getting germs from every single other person that's touching their crayons. For things like going to the bathroom whenever they need to, because we know how these drugs affect them. Using a water bottle frequently, having their own set of tissues and things like that, I would say are just a few of the things that I would have in IEP and 504 plan.
Okay, great. So I did hear, she did write in about the question, child feeling socially isolated in activities. It was more about physical activities, gym, and physical type activities.
Oh, okay. So I would probably say, like, I would talk to the gym teacher and see if there's a way that they could adapt the gym class for the child so that he's not so socially isolated. And also, if he has like a buddy there or somebody that he's friends with, having that child maybe help him with some of the activities. The gym teacher should be able to adapt the activities though to the child's level, and that's something you can put in a 504 plan as well, is having gym activities adapted so that the child can continue to do them. So maybe a child doesn't have to do push-ups, but they can do something else that is, equal to that. So I don't know if that helps at all. In terms of social isolation, is if the child is being left out of gym class, that's a problem. I would say that that should be added into the 504 IEP plan, that they have the gym class adapted to what they are able to do so that the child isn't feeling socially isolated, because that is a problem for a lot of kids that have transplants. They feel different. They feel isolated because of this transplant, because of what's happened to them, and they shouldn't be feeling isolated even more because they can't do a certain class.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question. Who covers the cost of an advocate or a mediator?
Mediators are usually covered by the school. The advocate is covered by the parent. So if you want an advocate, you would have to pay for that, which is why I said that if you want to go to mediation, that is usually covered by the school instead. So it depends on what you want to do. Mediators are usually the ones that are going to advocate, advocates are the ones that are going to advocate best for your child and getting you what you want to see in your child's IEP or 504 plan. And they're the people that are going to be going to an IEP meeting with you and saying why this should happen, why your child needs this, what it is that your child needs. A mediator is somebody that's just on both sides, and neither sides at the same time, and so is just trying to get both sides to come to an agreement the best way that they can.
Okay. Thank you, Stacy. I think that's it for all of our questions. I really want to thank you so much for this really informative presentation. We really appreciate your time and your wealth of knowledge and your expertise in presenting this information. It's been really helpful. I think I'm just going to try and take back the screen, and
Okay.
I just want to point out a resource that the Children's Cardiomyopathy developed a school resource kit for parents, and it's available on our website. It's called Ensuring a Good Learning Environment. And though it's intended for the cardiomyopathy community, the information included can be easily adapted for any child with a chronic medical condition. The kit contains information about knowing your rights as a parent, how to work with school personnel, to obtain appropriate accommodations and modifications, including the plans that Stacy talked about, the IEP and the 504, as well as the healthcare plan and an emergency care plan. Included in the kit are guidebooks, sample school letters, and templates that you can modify easily. So if you're interested, PDF copies of the school resource kit are available on the CCF website. And you can also get a hard copy of it on our website as well. And in just closing, I just want to thank everybody for being part of this very informative webinar today. Stacy, you did a great job. And Melissa, I want to thank you for partnering with us to present this information. I have included on the screen the website for CCF as well as Transplant Families. If there's any information that you need to get from these organizations, you can please go to the website. Any other questions or any other comments, Melissa or anybody?
Yeah, if I wouldn't mind jumping in, I definitely encourage everyone to go get the documents from that Cindy just mentioned. They are amazing. They have just letters written out for you that you can take to your IEP 504 teams, and you just have to fill in the blanks, basically. And I also want to highlight, don't forget to lean on your transplant team. They can be your advocates as well. All the children's hospitals, they have form letters they can send out to help you advocate for your child in these meetings. And they definitely bring a lot of power to the table when they write that letter to say, hey, my child needs this because A, B, and C. Finally, I definitely encourage everyone to share your story this week with the hashtag Kids Transplant Week. When you share your story, it encourages others to remember what a gift organ donation is, and if they're ever in the position to help, they remember these stories. So thank you all so much. Thank you for your strength and resolution and all you do to fight for your kids before and after transplant. Thank you so much, Cindy, for having us, and thank you, Stacy.
No problem.
Thanks, everybody. We'll be sending out an email to everybody who registered with the slides, and I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.